Good morning, everybody. We're going to just take a second. Good morning. Thank you for that. I promise you're going to hear a little bit less from me and from a much smarter, better panel than me in a second. So just give us a second to set up. All right. So yesterday, for anyone who was in the room, we had that talk about, so you learned about NF yesterday, you learned about CTF, or how to talk about them, because you obviously know the disease and you know the organization, the 3 coffee cups, the small, medium, and large. And then you heard Rebecca talk about sort of, this is the off-menu, extra large. Now it's time to talk about yourself. And so this is, telling your personal story. We have this tremendous panel who's going to be leading us through this discussion today. I'm going to do bios for all 3, and then we're just going to go one by one. So I'm going to start on that end. I'm going to go in the order of speakers. So the first speaker is going to be Kevin Hauswirth, who's the gentleman at the end of the table there. He is the founder and principal of the strategic communications firm Hauswirth Co., based here in Chicago. He is a social entrepreneur, marketing communications executive, and education leader, working alongside big brands, advocacy, and politics to orchestrate strategies and assemble the right teams to help organizations shine. He has earned a reputation for making the wonky relevant, and this skill was recognized by Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel, who appointed Kevin as Chicago's first head of digital communications, driving social media strategy, digital engagement, and innovation across multiple government agencies. Kevin is an educator at heart, and he teaches integrated marketing communications courses at Chicago universities and contributes to the profession through public speaking engagements. He currently serves on the board of trustees for Adler University and previously on the board of directors for Equality Illinois. Kevin knows what it takes to establish strong brand personalities, one of the things we talked about yesterday, and we're lucky to have him here today for what I promise will be a terrific conversation you'll be talking about later. After Kevin, you'll hear from Melissa Brunner, who's right here. Melissa is an award-winning managing editor and anchor of the 5, 6, and 10 p.m. newscasts for WIBW TV out of Topeka, Kansas. She's a native of Manitowoc, Wisconsin. Did I say that right, Manitowoc? I did not. I knew it. And I was going to look it up. Say it? Manitowoc, Wisconsin. I apologize to our Wisconsinites, which I know there are quite a few in here. And this is a fun fact. She began her broadcasting career doing Lake Michigan fishing reports for her hometown radio station. With a degree in broadcast communications from Marquette University, it wasn't long before Melissa was making waves in the media world and covering key issues like crime, the legislature, and even a weekly To Your Health feature. She's been with WIBW since 1996, so it looks like she was there when she was 3. And we can see why they love her. Her impactful work has earned numerous awards from the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, Kansas Associated Press, Kansas City Press Club. She earned a regional Edward R. Murrow Award for writing and has been recognized with 2 Heartland Regional Emmy nominations for her anchoring and reporting, and been part of newscasts that 3 times earned Smaller Market Best Newscast Emmys. She's been honored by numerous civic and nonprofit organizations in Topeka and Kansas for her commitment to community. And in fact, among the many organizations in which she is involved is the Children's Tumor Foundation. In this session, you'll find out why. And again, another presentation, which I think you'll be talking about later. And then in the middle, and our last speaker, is Alwyn Diaz. He is a highly talented executive coach with extensive experience developing and implementing programs designed to achieve strategic business and operational goals. His client groups span across various industries, including finance, law, marketing, manufacturing, and sales. Currently with the Bridge Consulting Group, he's been an HR leader for companies like Prudential, McGraw-Hill, MetLife, and JP Morgan Chase. And if Alwyn looks familiar to you, well, that's because he is. He has been one of our key storytellers in our Make NF Visible and This is NF awareness campaigns. He is the NF1 patient representative on CTF's Clinical Care Advisory Board and is a key voice in NF patient advocacy with researchers, clinicians, regulators, and beyond. And one thing I'll say about Alwyn, every time I hear him speak, I learn something new and am re-inspired. by the NF community. So again, we're looking forward to Alwyn. So I've made that promise 3 times, 3 amazing speakers. We're looking forward to this panel. We're going to start with Kevin. He's going to give us insights about authenticity and knowing your true self when it comes to telling your story, followed by Melissa, who will teach us how to apply that story to some very everyday situations, including useful tips on how to approach and talk to the media, which is something I know a lot of you all come to our team to ask about. So we're happy you're here, Melissa. And then Owen will talk about how to, and also about how to make NF visible literally in the media. And then Alwyn will bring us home with some lessons on observations from communicating his NF journey. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin. And if you can put up the Hauswirth deck for Kevin.
Thank you. Can everyone hear us okay? Wonderful. Oh, I get to click?
You want me to click or you want to click? You can do
more seating, whatever. I feel so empowered. So we're here to talk a little about storytelling, and I think the place I'd like to start is there are millions of stories that have already been told, and one of the ways that we can connect with folks in an impactful way and quickly is to anchor it in things that are familiar, especially when we're dealing with a topic or we're talking about an issue that may seem very wonky or unfamiliar to folks. So what I thought we'd talk about today is characters. You are all characters in your story. Every good story has a cast of characters. So what I thought we'd talk a little bit today is there are 12. That's it. There are 12 character types. And so what we were going to talk through today is how we can identify who we are, and then the people around us, and then look for proxies that we've heard before from the Bible, from fairy tales, from Disney movies. So what I want to talk a lot about today is archetypes. Has anyone done work with sort of archetyping before? A little bit. So some of it's rooted in psychology, and it's based on this theory that there's 12 that we're going to talk about today. Not 11, not 13. You don't get to be 4 because then the story starts getting very blurry. And as I'm going through these, what I would love for you to be thinking about is what jumps out to you as I'm speaking through these archetypes that you recognize. Like, that's my mom, or that's definitely my kid, or that's me. And if we can identify the characters of the story, then it helps anchor how you can tell it because it's familiar. Because it starts sounding like, oh, this is like that Star Wars episode, or this is that Disney movie. So the reason that one of the ways that archetypes, you can tell that archetypes are so powerful is that you can take a quiz on Facebook that says, what Disney princess are you? Or everyone's got that friend that's their Samantha or their Blanche, because they're just rooted in these sort of archetypes. So they can kind of be clustered. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on magical charts, but here's 12. There are rulers, the lover, the caregiver. I'm going to go through these one at a time. And so what we find when I'm working in marketing and branding is it's really helpful when a brand knows where they stand. You will also notice that some sectors just tend to gravitate towards certain archetypes. For example, no one wants their bank to be a jester, for example, or perhaps their doctor. So we use this a lot in branding and with organizations to find your personality, when nowadays you can literally talk to your dishwasher on Twitter. What personality would my dishwasher have? So what's important here is that just because someone has a title doesn't mean so one of the archetypes is the hero, but the reason hero stories work, X-Men, Marvel, is because there's different archetypes within the category. So for those of you who might be superhero fans or have kids who are superhero fans, Deadpool, the quintessential jester, Captain America, the traditional hero, Professor Xavier, the sage, and they all sort of work in concert together to be able to tell these stories. It's also important when we're talking about archetypes, we're not talking about stereotypes. Just because you might be the outlaw doesn't mean you're the villain in the story. Aladdin was an outlaw. The honey badger is an outlaw. So you might have these sort of outlaw vibes, but that doesn't necessarily make you the villain in the story. So it's really, I think, important to look at personality and get beyond sort of stereotypes and help anchor those stories. What you do for a living the role you play might feel like an archetype. For example, there's the caregiver archetype. Not all nannies are caregivers. Fran Fine was clearly the Jester. Arnold Schwarzenegger is not the same sort of archetype as a Mary Poppins. So just because you're in a caregiving role, how you take care is rooted sort of more in your archetype. As a personal example, my sister is a nurse, but she is not that sort of nurse who sits there and like cuddles you and calls you. She makes sure you take your damn medicine. And she's gonna sit there and she is a ruler in her entire life. And so while she is in the caregiving profession, she is that ruler nurse who is making sure the medication is taken on time, not sort of my mother, would be much more the caregiver nurse who's making sure that you're comfortable and your pillows are fluffed and your legs are elevated. And just because you have a sense of humor doesn't necessarily mean you're a jester. When we look at comedians, David Letterman was that quintessential everyman, the sort of relatable person. You have comedians who are more sagey, like The Daily Show. Like there's a sense of knowledge rooted in the sense of humor. So if you're the sort of person who uses humor, you can think a little bit about like, what is my brand of humor? What is my vibe of humor? And if you can anchor it in an actual person, it's helpful. So if you were to think about someone in your life or yourself in telling the story, instead of just saying like, I'm funny or I use humor, what kind of humor do we use? And it just helps people root it. So here they are. I'm gonna go through these really quick because they should be familiar. So you've got the ruler. They love power, they love control. We all know these from brands, from pop culture. The weakness of the ruler is they can be overbearing. They can almost be too controlling. So in all of these, you're going to see sort of the setup, some examples, and both the strengths and weaknesses of these. The lover, passion, desire, wanting to make people around them feel that same thing. They can sometimes not be taken seriously, which is a watch out, but there is something that just makes you smile and connected, and they're sort of driven by this passion. The caregiver. I have a feeling there might be a lot of caregiver archetypes sort of in this room. The main thrust is to take care of folks. Now, the jester can take care of people. The ruler, my ruler sister, takes care of people, but anchoring in the caregiver archetype is like, that is what drives you. I wake up every morning thinking, wanting to help people. This is the sort of person who everybody has their cell phone number. The hero. The hero is willing to go first. The hero is willing to take the step when they don't know where the path is gonna lead. They're the first one to go, and they're willing to bring people along with them. They'll carry that heavy load. The hero can sometimes have like a bit of a savior vibe if it over revs, but there's braveness in being able to go first. The jester is obviously fun, but they use humor as a way of bringing people together. That they can sometimes take the tension down in a room and create commonality through the use of humor as a tool of community building. So it's not all just fun and games. Humor is actually a device to make progress. The everyman. This is that quintessential, every politician wants to be that person you want to have a beer with. And it's just that person who is unassuming, who you feel like you can talk to about anything. The challenge is that this person can sometimes get lost in the crowd. They don't stand out, but they're that person that just makes you sort of feel comfortable and approachable. Oftentimes we'll find people will gravitate to another archetype, but their expression of that archetype is the everyman. So they might be sagey and wise, but they want to do it in a way that people can actually relate to and understand. The outlaw. They are breaking rules for the sake of breaking rules. Burn it down. Burn down the system. I'm not here to work within a system. I'm not here for incremental change. I am here to get rid of the system and create a completely different one. Every movement needs an outlaw. So even in political movements or advocacy movements, there are the people who will put on a suit and tie and go and negotiate, and then there are people who will like lay down in the street and get on the news and rabble rouse, and they're necessary in every movement, and they play an important role. The challenge is that breaking rules can come with consequences. The magician. We all love a magician. They make things happen. And you're gonna see the creator in a second. The difference between the creator and the magician is that you don't know how the magician did it. And that's okay. It's the person in your life who just always gets things done and there's outcomes, but you can't always explain it, which is sometimes the problem. Like the magician has to be able to sometimes reveal the trick so other people can do it. Whereas the creator, which we'll get to in a second, has a plan. Like there is a roadmap. The innocent. So sometimes kids naturally, we think of children sometimes as the innocent, but I think anyone who's a parent who is around kids knows that not all those kids are innocents. We've got jesters, we've got rulers, we've got creators. But it's important to know as you're sort of telling that story, the evolution, that maybe perhaps a character starts as the innocent and through their journey really finds themselves as the hero of the story. The explorer, boldly go where no one has gone before. But unlike the outlaw, they're not going just to go. They're going to find information, to check things out, and then to bring that knowledge back and share it with folks. And they're often the ones who are first to go and willing to go and seek that knowledge and explore. There's a thrill in going off the grid and seeing what's out there, but not so far off the grid that you're breaking all the rules. The sage. In medical communities, we want sages. Sages are very good. Sages and rulers will often be in community together. Every ruler needs a sage. And if you're dealing with someone with like a ruler archetype, you don't want to tell them what to do, but the sage will show them other options in the hopes that they will sort of go there. If anyone's seen My Big Fat Greek Wedding, there's that line where the wife says, "My husband thinks he's the brain, but the woman is the neck." Sage ruler, turning the neck so the ruler thinks they got there on their own. The creator, they make things happen, but they have a plan, they have a script, they have a recipe, and they can show you how to do it. It's not magic. So where do you fit? And I think as we're going through this discussion today, and as we're talking about how you sort of tell your own story, anchoring it in figuring out who are these archetypes, and then my challenge for you is once you sort of identify you and your family and your folks in that story, what does this story sound like? Is this really a Disney film? Is this really an episode of something I've seen? Is this a fable that I've heard? And then it really helps, that's a starting point, and you can help someone understand so much by starting with, you know, my story is really a story of Jaws. It's like, okay, tell me more. And then there's a path to it. So I'm gonna stop there and turn it over to the rest of the panel and take it over.
You know, everybody's wheels are turning, right? Who are you? But I want to be 4 types.
We're going to ask you that too. Think about when we get to the Q&A, if you want to share which of those you are, we'll put those back on screen. And what you think CTF is. That'll be a good one too. Yeah, go ahead.
But I'm trying to find my answer.
What's that?
I'm trying to find my answer now. You're making me think. So that's all great that you know who you are and you know what kind of story you want to tell, but how do you get it told? If there's no one there to hear it, then what kind of impact are you going to be able to have? So I'm going to go back to some of the basics. As Simon told you, I work for a television station, the CBS affiliate in Topeka, Kansas. And you might be wondering, why did they invite someone from Topeka? We're in Chicago. The legendary Bill Curtis works here, right? Bill Curtis started at WIBW TV, and I've been doing this a long time. But even more important than that is this. So this is my nephew, Owen. And Owen is 20 years old and works for the local hospital. He has NF1. And so we're extremely proud of all he's been able to accomplish. In Owen's case, most of his tumors are not necessarily visible. He was diagnosed when cafe au lait spots started showing up when he was a child. His first tumor was on his optic nerve when he was 4 years old, very successfully treated. He also has a tumor on his thalamus that sparked some early puberty, has a shunt to control some swelling and drainage. His main struggle now at age 20 is seizures. So they're trying to get a handle on that, but they're on a family vacation. So Owen says hi. So Owen is how I learned what NF is and how I came to be involved with Children's Tumor Foundation. I'm extremely fortunate that since I do medical reports and I collaborate with our medical partners in Topeka to be able to do stories, I can, during May, say, hey, how about we do something on NF? And we have several local families, so it's been a joy to do. So the basics, how do you communicate with the media? Who? And there are a couple answers to the who, and I'm going to get to that second deeper answer to who in a bit. What, where, when, why, how. Those are all simple things, right? If you have an event coming up, you need to tell them who you are, NF, Children's Tumor Foundation, Shine a Light Walk, what it is, where it is, when it's happening, and then how do you get there, the why and the how. Beyond the basics, if you're sending a news release to let the media know or any other folks in the public know, make sure that you include contact name and number, who can be reached, when and why. That's important because they might look at your news release and maybe you inadvertently left something out. They might be running a little late. They want to know, are you still going to be here at 11 o'clock instead of 10 o'clock? So it's important to have where you can be reached on the day of the event. Photos and graphics when they're appropriate to explain. Sometimes, you know, in Kansas, we're very rural, so we cover a 17-county area. Some of the folks we cover live 2.5 hours away. We can't always get to everything, but if you send us a photo of your event and an explanation, and in a timely manner, you might still get it mentioned on the news or in your local paper just by virtue of communicating that way. Beware of any insider lingo. SB 423. What the heck is that? It's a legislative bill, right? Not everybody communicates in that language. So you would want to explain NF1 or maybe a drug or we're going to do this or that. Use some terms that people can relate to or an explanation for what that is. SB 423, I think it was one that dealt with criminal sentencing. So I wouldn't say we're going to have a rally in support of SB 423, I would say we're going to have a rally in support of the Senate bill that would change sentencing guidelines or something like that. So that it's, and then make sure you update your contact information. So who do you contact in your local media for television, radio, newspaper, magazine? It's usually going to be a news editor or an assignment editor. Most have websites and Facebook pages now, so you can look on there very easily to make sure that the information is getting to the correct person. Make a simple phone call to that newsroom and find out, where am I supposed to be sending this information to? We had an email address that 2 years ago went away because of an update in our system. People still send to that email address, and unfortunately our company didn't send up a way for that email to still get through. So there's stuff that 2 years later we're missing unless we happen to see it somewhere else. And also say why your event matters or why the information that you're trying to communicate matters to people. That's a big one. You know, then when every time I write a story, the very first sentence shouldn't be, the city council met today, because what are you going to do? I mean, who wants to know the city council met today? Whatever, they're a boring group of people, right? But what they do matters to you. So instead, I'm going to say something more along the lines of, the local city council is talking about how to spend your tax dollars tonight. Or the city council is talking about making you pay more on your property tax bill next year. That's a little bit more, oh, I probably need to listen to this than the city council met tonight. A group of researchers from NF met today, or the FDA met today to consider NF research. Okay, they do that all the time. What's new this time? The FDA met today to approve the first ever treatment for NF. Now that's something you're going to sit up and listen to a little bit more so than this group just sat down to talk. And here's an example of what I mean. You don't think this is going to happen? Make sure you're giving enough notice for your event. Sure, the media thrives on breaking news, and we can respond very quickly to breaking news. But those scheduled events, we do like to plan a little bit for those. So an event that we get notice of and we can plan for is probably going to get a little bit more priority than if something happens and we have to decide and pick and choose. So my boss has a whole file of these. This was sent at Monday, 9:53 a.m. for a photo opportunity at 10 a.m. that day. You tell me what we're going to do with that, especially if it's not something, and you can say this doesn't happen that often. Twice last week it happened in our newsroom. It's 10:15. Come for this 9:30 meeting we have for these families. No, that's just, So, it's good to send it maybe a week in advance and then follow up with a phone call, maybe a day in advance. Email is best. Everybody has social media. Everybody makes events, right? Event notices on social media. That maybe is not the best way to go about it. And the reason is this. Now, you can look at this two ways. One is that social media is extremely powerful. These are some of the latest stats I found out from some sites. Facebook has 300 million photos a day, 510,000 comments posted a second. Twitter, 456,000 tweets a minute. Instagram, 95 million photos and videos a day. And YouTube, 500 hours of video uploaded every minute. There's a lot of content to find. And what it means is if you're relying on social media as the only way to let your local partners know about your event, it can very easily also get lost, because most of these are now based on algorithms. I think Twitter is the only one you can set on a real-time scroll. And so it can very easily get lost in that algorithm or that shuffle. So that's why email, especially with media, is still kind of the traditional way to make sure, or a phone call. I mean, my gosh, the power of a person will pick up the phone and call is a very powerful thing to use. So I told you about the second definition of who. Who isn't just Children's Tumor Foundation or the Shine a Light Walk. The who is also, who are you? Are there any Walking Dead fans? Who still watches The Walking Dead? So, the character Father Gabriel, right? He's a priest. There was an episode this last season where, so The Walking Dead's like zombie apocalypse, and there are all these different factions all over the place, and people are always finding new groups of people, but can you trust these people, right? So they go and they bring Father Gabriel along this past season to meet one of these new groups of people, and he takes off his priest collar. And the person he's with is like, well, why are you doing that? And he's like, I just don't want to wear it. So they go into the meeting. And they have this conversation, and at some point, the man reveals that he knew all along that Father Gabriel was a priest, and his response was, I wanted you to see who I am before you saw what I am. And if you think about that, not in terms of the zombie apocalypse, but if you're doing an interview with someone trying to share your story, pick on Hannah. If I go to Hannah and I say, tell me about Eli, maybe the first way she answers that shouldn't be, well, Eli's my son, he has NF. Maybe she should be, well, Eli's my son, he's a super goofy kid, he loves doing fun, adventurous things, and we love going and doing trips as a family together. And he happens to live with NF. Just like when I introduced Owen, I said, Owen's 20 years old, he works at the local hospital, and he lives with NF. I want you to hear who I want to hear as a reporter, at least if I'm a good reporter. I want to hear who you are before I make that assumption of what you are. Oh, you have NF. That means you live with a disability and maybe you can't do certain things. That may be true. I mean, obviously, come on, living with NF isn't a bed of roses. But it's so much more than that. I don't want to make a judgment on Father Gabriel wearing his priest collar that, that means he's very passive, he's going to avoid confrontation, and he's just going to be the pacifier, and he's not going to stand up for the
said NF has no cure and no treatments for tumors that often are inoperable. The family was sent to a specialist in Philadelphia.
They came in and said, it's one of the most severe cases in a child this age that we've ever seen. He certainly will never walk, he'll never talk, he'll never have the abilities more than an infant.
Pretty much we were told, go home, hold your child, enjoy the time you have.
They did, but they also decided to fight back. At 6 months old, a doctor gave Frankie a trach to help him breathe and a feeding tube for nutrition. Then they waited.
We knew this wasn't solving the tumor issue.
By the time Frankie was 6 years old, the tumors had grown beyond his trach, compressing his airway so much air was only getting through a space the width of 2 dimes.
It was basically killing him. These tumors were cutting off his airway, so he was at a point where he wasn't going to be able to breathe again.
Doctors can't simply remove the tumors because they're so wrapped up in his nerves and tissues. The only idea they offered was a life-threatening surgery to perhaps scrape away some of the growth. Still, doctors kept searching, and that landed them at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, where for the first time, they heard something new.
Options and hope.
First, the Cincinnati doctors stented open Frankie's airway. Then, in 2016, he became their first patient in a clinical trial for AstraZeneca's drug Caregiver, research funded by Children's Tumor Foundation.
It's like if you look at the brakes in a car, they have the front brakes, but not the back brakes. Their cell division is still controlled. It's still kind of okay. But of course, if they now lose the front brakes, then the car can't stop anymore. And cell division just keeps going. It's kind of putting in some set of artificial brakes, if you want.
This was Frankie when he started the trial.
He wasn't very interactive. He didn't smile. He couldn't put his head up or down. He couldn't move left or right. He couldn't put his tongue in his mouth, but the breathing was the worst.
3 years later, his main tumors have shrunk 33%.
So funny.
More than enough to bring back Frankie's smile.
The cognitive things just skyrocketed. Before we started, his IEP was very social based at school, just making sure he has social time and getting to interact with kids. And then all of a sudden, the teachers were like, hey, he knows something, he's learning. So we started learning colors and shapes.
And then there was this.
Come here.
Frankie started walking.
Nice job, bud.
We went through so many years of hearing there's nothing we can do.
Nice job.
And now there's something that can be done. There's options.
We've always talked about hope, but this is not hope. This is real. This drug works.
In mid-April, Vukelj became the first drug to earn Food and Drug Administration approval to treat children with NF1.
We can finally go now to the families and tell them that there is something.
Every day now brings new victories for Frankie. He finally can communicate with a device and some sign language. This is thank you.
Signing I love you was a fun one for us.
Watching Frankie find his world and his place in it brings faith of a brighter future, opening the door not just for their family, but for others.
And that feeling of hopelessness is one of the worst feelings you can feel as a parent. And any little bit of hope makes a tremendous difference.
Giving other families a chance to maybe fight this disease like we have is real encouraging to us.
And that's Frankie. Frankie continues doing well. Annette, thank you for being one of our first Zoom interviews. That story was done very early in the pandemic, and in true Kansas fashion, the newscast was delayed that night by a tornado warning. But Frankie's story still got told. But you can see, so when you deal with the media, we're looking for visuals. We're looking for, you have to be able to kind of put yourself out there. It is about being vulnerable. You make eye contact with the person. You don't have to be a scientist, even if you are a scientist and know this intimately. I loved how when Annette described what the drug can do, it's like putting the brakes on a car. If you are a scientist in this room who's doing a media interview, you can tell the reporter's eyes will kind of glaze over when you're talking and they'll just nod. And you can tell they don't understand what it is you're saying. So just ask them, did you understand that? And they might say, you need to explain it again, or you can kind of think of a different way to kind of simplify it. It doesn't have to be, when you're giving, and talking points, when you're doing a media interview, you're not giving a 10-minute speech. So don't worry about that. I think some people think, well, I can't do a media interview because they're gonna want me to talk for 10, 15 minutes. You don't have to do that. I love this one because our directors put this up for us when we walk in the studio all the time. Get to the point. You only have to have a few sentences. If they want you to expand more, they will ask you to expand more. And this is just a picture of my dog because she was cute. Lucy's no longer with us, but CTF was kind enough to send me the little bandana for her. So we'll get to questions in a little bit, but I know you want to hear from Owen because he's more fun. You are more fun.
Hi, guys. Everybody has their story. I'm just one of an individual that has NF that has my own story. When I was born overseas, my family immigrated to the United States. And my mother took me to a doctor and they found a marble-sized tumor on my back. My mother, not knowing what that was, doctor said it's neurofibromatosis, all the same things. Rarest thing that can happen to a child, not sure what to do, but here's the prognosis of what could happen. Doing that for my mother was like having her type neurofibromatosis in Google and then finding out all the craziness that can happen to a child. And it caused a lot of anxiety. So being immigrants to a country, on top of their son having a rare condition, there was a lot of protection. And my parents wanted to do the best for me that they could in terms of how to survive, how to be a kid with this condition. And they knew that anything different as a child can be somewhat hard. And so I was told that, the tumors that I have on my chest, on my back, were actually extra muscles. And so when I would speak to various people, teachers or kids, they'd be like, well, what's that thing growing out of your chest? Or what's that thing that is giving you a hunchback? I'd say, oh, it's an extra muscle. It's just like, some people have freckles. I have an extra muscle there. And I believed it. From the ages of 4 up until 13, I thought that this is what it was. But instead of realizing that it wasn't a muscle, I was realizing that I wasn't truly being myself, that I was constantly hiding myself. And there was no room for vulnerability, and there was no room for authenticity. And having that as a child, in your teens and early 20s, you become a different person. You become somebody that you don't even know yourself. And the decisions that you make in that time aren't really the best decisions, because they're not decisions that are supporting you authentically. They're decisions that are supporting something that you think you are, that you're trying to hide. So living a life with authenticity doesn't even exist, because you're living a life that you've created, this construct of reality that doesn't exist. And that's what you're supporting, and it's exhausting. So suffering from depression, suffering from anxiety, you get it all. It wasn't until 2015 when, this is where the story gets a little crazy. It wasn't until 2015 that, everything came to a stop. So I grew up listening to a lot of punk rock music, and anybody that has been to a punk rock show can understand that it can get pretty physical and aggressive. So I've spent my teen years and into my 20s and 30s, and at 40 years old in 2015, I was jumping off a stage at a punk rock show. I was doing it a number of times. It was then maybe my third date with my wife at the show. And each time I jumped off the stage, I started to feel my legs give out a little, and my gait started to widen. And I said to her, we need to go home. Something's not right. I don't feel well. I need to go home. She may not have known this, but I knew that me missing out on another band coming on stage was huge. That next morning I woke up and I had trouble getting out of bed. Then when I went to take a shower, I couldn't get out of the bathtub. And I called her and I said, either we need to go to the emergency room, a chiropractor, or I need to see my doctor. And she said, well, I've been telling you, you need to see your doctor for a long, long time. Kind of like your sister. So that point went from me starting not to be able to walk to me being paralyzed from the chest down. And it was at that point that my wife said to me, if you don't figure out what is going on for you and you don't start taking care of yourself, then we won't have a life that we could truly live together. That's going to be amazing. And next to my wife is our 2 kids, Alex and Deja, that make me gives me such an amazing life. So realizing that in 2015, I needed to learn how to walk again and needed to figure out what life was like, because I got smacked with reality. It was no longer I have an extra muscle on my chest. It was no longer having to do with needing to be the norm in order to exist. It was, I have NF, this is part of my reality, but it isn't who I am. But I found that as I was going back into work and I started my own practice as an executive coach, HR consultant, and an advocate, I found that the more I told my story of having NF with the authenticity and feeling and emotion and fear and vulnerability, the easier it was for me to live life. The easier it was for me to actually enjoy life. I have a blast with my family because I know I have this condition, not from the perspective of like, I love having NF. It's from the perspective of I have NF and I get to live this beautiful life. So my life becomes my story, and NF becomes something that I have to contend with, not ignore, because it's still a part of who I am. And that's my journey. My journey is to continue to foster good health to the best that I can with the amazing physicians that take care of me, and also being aware of the fact that I have this beautiful life to live. None of this really could have happened if it wasn't for the Children's Tumor Foundation. In 2015, when I started to learn how to walk again, Rebecca Harris asked me to be a part of, making NF visible. And when I went to the CTF office, I just thought Children's Tumor Foundation was a foundation that helped children with tumors, one of them being NF. I had no idea that it had to do with making NF visible. And that's what launched me into realizing that the more I need to tell my story, live my story, and face my story, is the more authentic a life can be. And being so authentic in this life that I have to tell you, it brings more joy in a place 10, 20 years ago that only brought depression, anxiety, and sadness. So bottom line with all of it is living with the vulnerability of having the condition, facing it head on and knowing you have it, and truly following your passions with being truly you in your holistic self in order for you to grab the opportunities that you want. So that's a little bit about me. There's a lot more, but I don't think Simon will allow me that time.
I told Alwyn that we could set up the whole hour. We're going to open it up to, I think we've got about 10 minutes. We're going to open it up to questions from the audience. There's one in the chat, which I think is very good. And it talks about overcoming your fears. And I'd love to hear from maybe the entire panel. So we're human, we
Right.
get nervous, we're fearful. In this question, he actually asks, how do you overcome your fear of sounding pompous? Which I thought was a unique take. In my brain, before I even read this, I was thinking the opposite, which is how do you overcome your fear of being shy, and how do you be able to approach? So anyone who wants to take this or chime in, and it could be anywhere from if you're a certain archetype that is not prone to being sort of the hero and the leader, how do you overcome that if you are called to do it? And then obviously, Melissa, you have some very real examples of people you've probably put on camera who froze at that moment.
Well, I would just say take a deep breath. And then also agree to the type of interview you're comfortable with. In most cases, it's going to be recorded and edited and something that's done later. There are instances where it is a live interview on an interview style program, but just know that going in. But if it's something that's recorded and is going to be put together like we did the Frankie piece, that might be the first step to saying, okay, I can relax a little bit because I can go back and repeat it. And it's not going to be that big of a deal. If I misspeak, I can just say it again. We had a police department PIO years ago who said, I just know if I cuss, you can't use it. So I just cuss if I don't like the way it sounded. You don't necessarily have to do that. But piggybacking though on what Alwyn said, I think the main thing, people ask the media all the time, why do you, a lot of times we get the question when it comes to crime, people who've been affected by a tragic crime. Why do you want to talk to those people? Why do we want to talk to the patients? I would say, and as a survivor of violent crime myself, I will tell you, it can be empowering. It is your chance to share your story the way you want it to be told. It's your chance to have some control over what it is people hear about NF or whatever the circumstance or situation is. And that's why we ask. I give people the opportunity to say no, but that's why it's so important. I could have only had Annette talk about the drug, but wasn't it more powerful to see Frankie and meet Frankie's family and see the difference it actually, and hear the difference it actually made? So take a deep breath, I guess, would be the first way to get over your fear, and then understand that this is your chance to have control.
Yeah. I'm also a professor, and one of my students asked me, how do I not come across as pompous? And I said, has anybody ever told you that you were pompous? And she said, no. And I was like, then why are we concerned about it? The other piece about being shy is, being vulnerable and taking that moment to be who you truly are. The more you practice it, the more you are able to be truly yourself and share your story. The two ways of that I would say to get over being, not being pompous and getting over being shy is similar a little bit to my story. Jump off the stage, just do it. And you'll find that, which is what happened for me, the more vulnerable I was, the more authentic to self I was, the more good things happened. The more I got, more work to do in terms of the business that I have, the relationship that I have now with my wife and my kids. All of that happened because I jumped in and I didn't hold myself back from a reality that really wasn't who I was. So.
Yeah, I would say also read the room. I think this like fear of being pompous sometimes is rooted in like this, you just give the same thing. Like no matter who you're talking to, you give the same thing. So I think like part of the reason I was talking about these sort of archetypes is that you are in relationship and community with the audience. So if you've self-identified, my poor sister, I keep using my sister. If you recognize that you have ruler tendencies, that you like things structured, you like processes sometimes just for the sake of having a process, and you're in community or working with someone that does not function that way, a level of self-awareness and a level of being able to read the person that you're with will help you figure out, for lack of a better word, how to persuade them, how to step into their shoes and figure out how they're going to be brought along a little bit. We use the example of the sage and the ruler, that rulers don't want to be told what to do. They want to be shown something and then feel like they've gotten there themselves. So I think part of the reason that I focused on those sort of 12 archetypes is because you can, a perfect example, the one I like to use a lot, Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote, the quintessential creator versus the sage. Wile E. Coyote makes these like parachutes and these TNT things. He's got this whole setup. And then the Roadrunner just steps to the side and he runs off a cliff. So you can find these examples and you'd find these proxies. So my advice is often, what you're probably experiencing isn't unique. You've probably seen this somewhere else. And what can you learn from having seen it somewhere else that then you can implement? And recognizing that you can, that knowing where you're coming from and being able to adapt for the scenario and for the people that you're in conversation with.
Awesome. Let's, if there are any questions from the audience, we'd love to hear from you. I think we've got another 6 or 7 minutes. We have a Matt Hay. Is that Matt? Yes.
So I want to jump in now just because my thoughts while you guys were talking really piggyback on what you just said. I struggled with that for a long time. As you can tell, it didn't take me long to grab the microphone, so I got over it, right? There's nothing special about, well, I was just saying there's nothing special about what they do. What they do is no more special than any of you. We talk about make NF visible. It's not make NF poetic. It's not make a wonderful speech. It's make it visible. And sometimes the best thing you can do is just get up, if you're being put in that situation, and just exist. That's what making NF visible is. You don't have to walk away and say, "Well, I really moved mountains." You know, they're going to write epic poems about what I just shared. Part of making NF visible is just letting people you know exist. And I'm sharing that because it really helped me that what I have to say, I think one of the slides was there's no wrong answers. You can't say the wrong thing. And that's pretty true. You share your story. You are just as special as anybody else out there that has a story to share. They don't have any right to share their story more or less than you. So share it because you can, and share it because all you need to do is let people know you exist. So that, I'm just sharing that because it's something that helped me. And you know what? Existing is pretty easy. You don't have to be funny to exist. You don't have to be sharp to exist. We all need to be out there to let people in our community know we exist. And I think when I think of the NF, make NF visible, it goes back to a decade ago when I started doing more of this, of thinking, oh, that's part of me getting motivated to just exist. The other thing I want to share, because I have the microphone, and again, we're going to get a lot of power on having the microphone. When we were talking about social media, this is the secret sauce for me of 20 years of development through NF endurance events. So don't share it with anybody outside of CTF, right? Like our outside of NF community, let's keep it our thing. Sunday nights, posting things on Sunday nights. Everybody goes and sees if what they did over the weekend was any better than what their friends did over the weekend. You go and look at pictures and you have that FOMO. But people are on the couch, you have their attention, but even better, you have their credit card. So by posting something, if you're doing fundraising or development on a Sunday night, you have their attention and credit card better than any other time. So if you look back through anything, if you guys are on social media, anything I've ever posted, you'll always see it almost always pops up at 6 or 7 o'clock on a Sunday night. And by 10, I'm 30% of the way to my goal. So Sunday nights.
You know what's funny is I realized I glossed over that bullet point. And what did I write there? No wrong answer. Yeah. So literally, I thought of that bullet point as you were talking to reinforce that. If you need Now, where the CTF team might tell you there could be some maybe less than accurate answers, that's where they can help you out with the talking points about CTF itself. But yeah, as far as your story, there's no wrong answer to it. And the Sunday 10 p.m. newscast is historically the one that has the highest ratings for exactly what you said. That's when people are catching up from their weekend. And now we know that people are also second screening and flipping through social media while they're watching the Sunday 10 p.m. newscast in the central time zones. So there's research to back up why those Sunday evening social media posts are effective.
And it's a good plug. We have a social media session today at 3 p.m. With one of Kevin's colleagues who's going to be leading that session, along with 3 members of our community too. So it's a social. We're calling it the social media session, but it's really beyond that, because I think Melissa just made that good connection there too. Yep.
Hey,
Tracy Galloway.
Yeah. Hi. I got a quick question. So, I know when my daughter was young, I got on board and put her story out there, but then she grew into putting her story out on her own. But my question is, for a lot of people, they don't want to be seen as victims. You know, you want to share your story, but I know my daughter, I just want people feeling sorry for me. So how do you get comfortable with sharing that story and putting yourself out there without feeling like people are looking at you as like a victim, you know what I mean?
Sure. Anyone want to take this?
I think I could take it. When you tell your story and another person's reaction to your story, that's their problem. If you've told your story in the true, honest, true to self way, however somebody else takes your story, it's on them. And for us to spend another minute worrying about how somebody else is taking on your story and labeling you, that's, again, it's on them. One way to, my wife's uncle actually told me the best revenge you can have on somebody is to live a happy life. And that's kind of what I've been working with, is living the happy life and letting that be the story.
We have 1 more minute, so I think we can take another question if we've got anyone else in the room. We've got Dale Berg in the back.
Oh no.
This may be more of a statement, but I think breaking the ice and not necessarily leading with your story, but meeting somebody, or if it's a group of people, say, what's your story? You know, how's your health? How's your family's health? This room is full of rare diseases beyond NF. So I think you get people talking about their story, and then you sort of do the Paul Harvey and you talk about your story at the end, and it becomes sort of a two-way conversation. So you start learning about other people as they learn about you.
I think that's true. You know, the goal here, and I hope that what you come away with this entire summit, is the confidence to feel empowered to share your story, whatever your part of that story may be. And as Owen said, you can't control someone's reaction to what you say or do. You know, you can only control what you have said and your own reaction to it. And we're working to make NF visible. And so the more people hear, the more stories, the more likely they are to realize and understand that part of making NF visible is to know that people with NF are just like everybody else. They have thoughts, feelings, interests, activities, things they want to do. Maybe sometimes they just have to do it in a different way or make special accommodations in order to accomplish it. But every single one of you knows that you have the power to do whatever it is you want. You just might have to go about it a little bit differently.
And to hark back to something you said in your presentation, what is the story about? So like, yes, you cannot control someone's reaction to your story is on them. How we set it up, how we frame it. Is this a story about resilience? Is this a story about joy? Is this a story about science or innovation? And NF could be one of the characters of the story. It might not be the plot. So I think as you think about how you sort of structure these and you think about like, what is this story about when you're telling it, what is the role that NF plays? What is the character that it plays in that story? And then the story really is about something much bigger.
Awesome. I think that's a good place to stop because we're at time also, but that was a perfect summary. I want to thank our fantastic panel. Thank you for being here today. I'm going to do a a quick plug before you go to your break. We have a 10-minute break now before you go to your break. Now that you've learned how to tell your story, don't forget we have our media center. It's right outside on the left by registration. Feel free to pop in and practice. We'll delete the video if you don't want us to use it. Our panel's around for the day, so you can pick their brains too, or for at least a portion of the day, pick their brains if you'd like. 10-minute break, and then there are 3 panels. Look at the app. There is a 11 session on communication technology and NF2. That's in this room. Impact by the Numbers in Montreux, and starting an NF clinic in St. Gallen. So see you guys in 10 minutes.